He did some bad things, Jared Leto did. He gave some really horrific gifts. He had a henchman who would come into the rehearsal room, and the henchman came in with a dead pig and plopped it on the table. And then he walked out. And that was our introduction into Jared Leto.
Last year, Disney rolled out Jared Leto's passion project, Tron Aries, with the kind of manic, flop sweat marketing usually seen when a studio realizes too late it might have financed a very expensive mistake. They spent over $200 million trying to convince a world that had largely moved on to more pressing matters that the digital grid was still a place worth visiting, but the audience wasn't looking at the neon motorcycles or the sleek visual effects. They were looking at the 53-year-old perpetual teenager who had spent the better part of a decade positioning himself as the only person capable of saving this franchise. Leto wasn't just the star. He was a producer and the self-appointed architect of the film's creative soul. Yet by the time the movie actually flickered onto screens, his presence felt less like a box office draw and more like a neon warning sign. The opening weekend was a total catastrophe, pulling in a dismal $33 million domestically and leaving the House of Mouse staring at a projected loss of over $130 million. The film limped to a pathetic $142 million worldwide. It was the kind of spectacular failure that usually sends a leading man straight to the Hallmark Channel or a very quiet retirement in the south of France, but for Leto, the box office bloodbath was only the beginning of a much larger disaster. Just months before the film debuted, the industry's most persistent and whispered rumors finally solidified into a public record that even a studio as powerful as Disney couldn't pretend away. An investigation published by Airmail in June 2025 detailed allegations from 9 different women who described a decades-long pattern of improper conduct, predatory behavior, and a penchant for targeting fans who were barely old enough to vote. These weren't just the usual anecdotes about a difficult actor being a bit of a diva on set. These were detailed accounts of a man who reportedly used his fame, his rock band, and his carefully curated messiah complex to build a playground for his own worst impulses. While Disney had historically moved at the speed of light to cut ties with stars like Johnny Depp or Gina Carano at the first sign of a PR nightmare, they remained curiously silent as Leto walked onto the Tron press tour like a man who genuinely believed his own press releases. This hypocrisy was a bitter pill for the public to swallow, especially as they watched a man who dresses like a high-end wizard try to play the visionary artist, while women recounted stories of him allegedly approaching them when they were as young as 16. This entire collapse wasn't some sudden act of God or a freak accident. It was the inevitable conclusion to a narrative that Leto had been writing for himself since he first stepped off a bus in Hollywood with a personality twice as heavy as his talent. In the early 90s, he was the industry's newest obsession, playing the brooding Jordan Catalano in My So-Called Life, and essentially serving as a discount version of Leonardo DiCaprio for people who found Leo too mainstream. He was cast in roles where his primary job was to look pretty or get his face systematically rearranged, as seen in Fight Club or American Psycho. But Leto was never satisfied with being just another handsome face in a town built on them. He seemed to realize early on that if he didn't have the natural gravitas of his peers, he would have to manufacture it through a level of intensity that bordered on a psychological disorder. This was the start of a lifelong quest to prove he was deeper and more committed than anyone else on the call sheet, a journey that truly took a turn for the bizarre with the film Requiem for a Dream in the year 2000. To play a heroin addict, Leto didn't just study the part. He performed a sort of public martyrdom. He dropped 30 pounds, lived on the streets of New York, and reportedly stopped washing himself until he smelled like a dumpster fire in a humidity wave, effectively turning the entire production into a captive audience for his personal misery. This was the formal birth of the Leto brand, a belief that art is only valid if it makes everyone around you want to quit the industry and move to a farm. He learned that if you suffer enough for a role, critics will mistake your self-inflicted pain for actual talent. But this bottomless thirst for worship wasn't satisfied by movie sets alone. Jared eventually turned toward a medium where he could be the center of the universe every single night, without the pesky interference of a director. His band, 30 Seconds to Mars. Throughout the 2000s, the band grew into something that felt less like a musical group and more like a high-end social experiment designed to test the limits of fan loyalty. They called their fanbase the Echelon, a term that suggested a military hierarchy rather than a group of people who liked pop rock. And Leto didn't just lead the band. He curated a personality cult. He began dressing in flowing white robes, growing his hair to messianic lengths, and adopting a persona that felt like a calculated parody of a religious figure who also happened to have a very expensive stylist. The band even began selling merchandise that explicitly stated, "This is a cult." And they launched expensive retreats on a private island in Croatia, where fans paid upwards of $7,000 to spend a weekend with their leader. For that price, they got to participate in yoga sessions and listen to Leto give rambling speeches under the stars, providing a playground for a man who had spent his entire life wanting to be worshipped. This provided him with a shield of fanatical devotion that he clearly thought would make him untouchable in Hollywood, and for a while, it worked. The industry finally gave him the ultimate validation in 2013 when he won the Academy Award for Dallas Buyers Club. His performance as Rayon, a trans woman with AIDS, was critically acclaimed at the time, but the win served as the final dose of ego that would push him over the edge of sanity. Now, an Oscar winner, Leto felt he had been given a permanent license to behave like a total nuisance under the banner of method acting. When Warner Brothers cast him as the Joker in Suicide Squad, the marketing team leaned into his unhinged process to generate hype, and we were fed endless stories of him sending live rats to Margot Robbie or mailing used condoms to his coworkers. While Leto later tried to walk back the more disgusting details by claiming they were just wrapped snacks or lighthearted gifts, he originally joked about the condoms in a red carpet interview, proving that he was more than happy to let the world think he was a creep if it helped his brand. The narrative was that Leto was so deep in the character that he had become dangerous, but the reality was far more pathetic, because when the movie was actually released, his version of the Joker was widely mocked as a Hot Topic nightmare with the word "damaged" tattooed on his forehead. He had spent months harassing his coworkers and making the set a hostile environment for a role that amounted to less than 10 minutes of screen time, proving that the method wasn't about the character, it was about Leto demanding that every person in the room acknowledge his presence at all times. As the years went on, the gap between his perceived genius and his actual output began to widen into a canyon that you could see from space. He appeared in Blade Runner 2049 and House of Gucci, often hiding behind layers of prosthetics and thick accents that felt more like a Saturday Night Live sketch than an actual performance. By the time Sony released Morbius in 2022, the Leto brand had become a global punchline. The story of him using crutches on set to stay in character as a frail vampire became the definitive example of his absurdity because he was reportedly taking so long to use the bathroom that the production was falling hours behind. Eventually, the director had to make a deal with him. He could stay in character, but he had to let the crew push him to the bathroom in a wheelchair so they could actually finish the movie. It was a humiliating visual, a multi-million-dollar blockbuster held hostage by a 50-year-old man who wanted to be pushed around like a toddler, and the internet didn't react with awe at his commitment. They reacted with a meme that became a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons, and Sony was so out of touch that they re-released the movie in theaters, thinking the sarcasm was genuine interest, only for it to bomb a second time.
It's Morbin time.
Morbius was the moment Leto lost the benefit of the doubt because the tortured visionary act only works if the movies are actually good, and once he became a walking meme, the public started looking closer at the darker parts of his history. The 2025 airmail investigation was the final hammer blow, providing names and dates that the method acting defense couldn't cover up. One woman recounted being 16 years old when Leto reportedly got her number and began making sexual comments during late-night phone calls that were as persistent as they were inappropriate. Another woman, model Laura LaRue, described an experience from 2008 where she alleged that Leto began flirting with her and allegedly exposed himself to her when she was only 17 years old. His representatives have expressly denied all of these allegations, stating that the claims are demonstrably false and pointing out that he has not used alcohol or drugs in over 35 years, as if sobriety is an automatic shield against being a creep. However, the legal weight of these denials hasn't stopped the public from seeing this collapse as the final act of a very long, very annoying play. People are no longer laughing at the cult jokes or the wheelchair stories. They are seeing a roadmap of a man who believed the rules didn't apply to him because he was an artist with a shiny gold trophy on his mantle. Since Tron Aries limped out of theaters and onto the bargain bin of streaming services, the industry is finally conducting a career autopsy that is long overdue. Hollywood didn't turn on Jared Leto because they found a moral compass. They turned on him because he stopped being profitable. When your movies lose $130 million and your off-screen reputation involves 9 different women describing a pattern of predatory behavior, even the most expensive robes and the most dedicated cult can't save you from the reality of the situation. The Messiah has no followers left, and the sound you hear isn't the applause of a visionary, but the silence of an industry that has finally decided the act isn't worth the price of the ticket. Disney is now left holding the bill for a franchise they've likely killed forever, while Leto attempts to pivot toward his next transformative role as Skeletor in the Masters of the Universe reboot. But the landscape is fundamentally different because the public has seen the wheelchair stories and the airmail receipts, and they've realized that the method was never about the art. It was a tool for control, a way to dominate a movie set and a fan base while avoiding any semblance of accountability. Jared Leto wanted to be remembered as the next Daniel Day-Lewis, a man who disappeared into his work until only the character remained. But instead, he will be remembered as the man who disappeared into his own ego, leaving behind a trail of empty theaters and broken trust. He isn't the savior of cinema, he's a case study in what happens when a studio enables a monster in the hopes of a hit, only to find that the audience can see through the smoke and mirrors long before the credits roll.